fix that.
Yes, it is being live streamed. Yes.
Okay, great. I can't see you yet, so I'm just going to wait a moment until the Zoom screen takes me to YouTube. There we go. And I'm going to go back to Zoom so I can see you. Okay, I think we're live. Let me just double.
We are live.
It does say we're live. Okay, good. As long as you can see it, that's what counts.
Yeah. It told me we are live.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, hello. Hi, everybody. This is Annalisa with Journey to the Goddess TV, where I interview goddess scholars, artists, and practitioners to help me regenerate ancient feminine wisdom for modern women. Today, I am so fortunate to have Dr. Joanna Kujawa with me here today. Yes, I pronounced your last name correctly. So I'm going to give you a little introduction here, and then we'll just jump into the Q&A. Dr. Joanna is the author of The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddesses of Eros and Secret Knowledge. She's a scholar and a spiritual detective. She received her BA and MA from the Pontifical Institute for Medieval Studies at the University of Toronto, Canada, and her PhD from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. As an active academic for over 20 years, she uses her scholarly training to investigate topics other academics often pass over, such as, can spirituality and sexuality be experienced as one? Who was the real Mary Magdalene? And is there a lineage of goddesses now resurfacing in our collective experience of spirituality? Apart from her writings for academic publications on spiritual travel, Joanna has also had her short stories and essays published through various media and in many prestigious anthologies, including Best Australian Stories, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, She Rises. She's on the editorial board of the International Journal of Goddess Studies, and The Other Goddess is currently being translated into Mandarin. That's pretty cool.
I think so.
So before we dive in here, I just want to remind everybody to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. This is live, so you can chat. You can chat, I guess, while we're live. I can't see it, but maybe Dr. Joanna can see the live chat.
No, I cannot see that.
Okay, just leave a comment then later on. But I also want to tell everybody up front that they can purchase your book on Amazon, correct?
Yes. Okay. And can I show my book?
Please, yes.
So that's the book, yes, The Other Goddess.
Yep, purchase it, everybody. It is a page turner. I read it really quickly because I could not put it down. So again, welcome, Dr. Joanna. I'm excited to have you here.
I'm happy to be here, Annalisa. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, you're welcome. So we have a kind of a full load of questions today, and we'll see what we can get through. So what I'd like us to start with is just for you to give us a little bit of a background on your journey and also how you got interested in looking at Mary Magdalene as a goddess of Eros and secret knowledge.
So thank you for this, but you already gave a very good introduction, but it was more like, a regular bio introduction, right? Which is also less personal. So on a more personal level, I actually was born in Poland. And then I lived in France and Sweden and France and Canada and Malaysia. And now I live in subtropical Australia in Brisbane. But for a long time in Australia, I also lived in Melbourne, because this is where I got my PhD from. And it was interesting to be born in Poland at that time, because it was both communist and intensely Catholic. So what it prepared me for, it is to understand that what we experience, it's not necessarily truth. Right? That you have to fight to experience the truth. You have to make an extra effort, because I saw the propaganda right in front of me all the time because of the system in which I live. At the same time, although I moved away from, because my family was intensely Catholic, I moved away from Catholicism. But one good thing that I remember from this, it is that there was a strong presence of the divine feminine, not the one that I decided to follow, but at least I knew that it was possible. You know, the feminine and the divine was really one in a way, because Virgin Mary was the main deity being worshipped in Poland. And for those who are still Catholic in Poland, although it is not the case right now, people are moving away from the church in Poland, is the, with good reasons, is that the feminine and divine is basically one thing. But what I often also say in the interviews, that even as a young girl, I noticed that there was this other archetype of the feminine in Catholicism or in Christianity, which was Mary Magdalene, and that she was somehow pushed to the side, basically. And yet at the same time, she must have been important because she was very close to Jesus. And I saw her in many representations, on many paintings, in old churches. And it started to kind of ignite my curiosity about her, or even though at the time I still believed in the main narrative of Mary Magdalene, as the adulteress or the sinner or the harlot, which is of course not true. And this is what actually ignited my imagination, and I started to do research about her, but only many years later, only after I already was initiated into a tantric tradition and so on, when I started to seriously look at this, because for a long time, when I was at the Pontifical Institute, I just follow what, I was just the perfect student, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but there was a good side to this, because then I think it's good to be completely committed to whatever you do. So, I was the perfect student and I have learned so much, and I'm grateful to all my teachers. And then with the personality that I have, then I discovered that there is some untruth there. And then I move away from that and I seek the truth somewhere else. But at the moment when I'm discovering something, and that's why I like to call myself a spiritual detective rather than a professor or whatever, a spiritual detective, and then I'm completely committed to this, and you can find truth and learning in other places, and when you think that something disagrees with you, like for example, I started to notice that what is being taught about Mary Magdalene, the main narrative, is wrong and it's unfair. And I was looking for justice as far as Mary Magdalene is concerned, and that sexuality is portrayed in a very negative way, and it was not my experience of sexuality, and I'm sure that I'm not very unique. Other people have the same experiences, which I have later learned through confessionals in my book, that it was correct. But these things have to be looked into, so to speak, right? That's why I like to call myself spiritual detective in this way, because you committed to the investigation, you committed to the discovery, even if it takes you away from mainstream narratives, from mainstream institutions, which are basically based on mainstream narratives, and they were created to support the narratives. And because of my background from Poland, from communist Poland, I really have a BS detector, when there is no truth, right? So I started to use it, right? And I started to realize that to a certain degree, we are all being, with respect to the feminine and with respect to Mary Magdalene and with respect to sexuality, we are all being indoctrinated by mainstream institutions, not only religious institutions, but also like academia or any institution, medical institution, you name it. And
Science.
And they are science, exactly, big institutions. So for example, people laugh at medieval scholars, or medieval scholars, by this I mean not people who study medieval studies, but scholars who live in medieval times. And they said they based everything on faith. And I said, we are not any different, except that our faith shifted from one, absolute God to science, to a degree when we completely lost a sense of discernment. All right, discernment or discrimination, but discrimination understood in an intellectual way, like discriminating between truth and untruth. And so I don't know if I'm moving away from your original question, but basically this is what started my my journey towards Mary Magdalene, seeking for the truth about this woman, about sexuality also, and about sexuality and spirituality, and using my background actually as a kind of almost visceral reaction to or intuitive reaction or response to sensing untruth, right? So what is the true story?
It's interesting as you say that. It just kind of occurred to me because in a way, like, I think Mary Magdalene was probably doing that too in her own way, and that maybe perhaps she was also a spiritual detective. Would you say that?
She was I didn't think about it this way, but perhaps she was a spiritual detective, although there are so many alternative theories which are much more interesting than the mainstream theory about Mary Magdalene, that I tend to believe right now that she was probably much more enlightened than I was, so basically I am a spiritual detective, and that's I really love this role. Actually, I think like I found my calling, this way, doing this. And so it's a little bit like what the French call agent provocateur, right? Provocateur, which is not that I like controversy or anything like that, but it is, if it leads to this, then it leads to that, because truth has to be unveiled, or at least a possible truth. I do not claim that I have discovered a truth. I am discovering possible truths, that were hidden from us. And that's why I'm interested in esoteric traditions, which are on the fringes of all mainstream religions, including Western religions. All mainstream religions have esoteric traditions, and I think they hold more truth, let's put it this way, if not the whole truth, than mainstream religions that hold very little truth, or perhaps sometimes are intentionally or maybe unintentionally focused on controlling us rather than enlightening us,
right?
Developing our spirit. And this, in my opinion, applies to all religions, mainstream
Right.
religions. So to answer your question, I think Mary Magdalene was probably more enlightened than that. I think she was initiated quite early on, just to comment on this.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. I've often said that I feel very strongly that the archetype of Mary Magdalene, setting aside the historical person, but the archetypal Mary Magdalene, I feel like shows up for people. Like her form changes depending on kind of like the area within which that particular person is either looking to heal something or is trying to constellate that kind of archetype themselves.
That's right. I completely agree. That's why I entitled my book The Other Goddess. And why The Other Goddess? Because it is this, I think that divine feminine is really strongly resurfacing in our consciousness. And you are right. And it's resurfacing in ways that, we can accept. And everybody is interested in different things, and everybody has a different archetype to manifest in their own lives. And, and collectively as well. So, and a different level of spiritual evolution, we are all different. So I think that when I talk about Mary Magdalene, I really talk about the other goddess, because I think that this divine feminine is strongly resurfacing in our collective unconscious, but it wants to be resurfaced in this other form, not in this virginal form, not in this submissive, the forever compassionate mother form, which is a beautiful form, but it's just one of many of her faces.
Yes, yes, exactly.
So now the other goddess, that's why I said I chose this title very consciously, because when I spoke to my publisher, she says, what, the other goddess is another goddess? I said, no, the other goddess, I said, like, that's it. Like, I'm not changing the title, right? Because I do believe that the divine feminine is resurfacing now in this other form, and I think this is much more evolved and at the same much more complex form than what we were given before, when we have a Virgin Mary or Tara, which is this all compassionate mother, right, which is one and the same archetype, just under different names. And the other goddess, and I'm big on promoting her, is there are other faces to the divine feminine that we are told exist, because I believe that the compassionate mother is actually the only archetype that was allowed for us through patriarchy. And because I use this term patriarchy, and I just want to immediately define it, that I am not saying anything against men. I believe that patriarchy is a basically systematic dogmatism, that affects both women and men. And although men did have more privilege in this system and continue to have, they are also brainwashed into this, so spiritually they suffer just as much.
Totally agreed. Spiritually, probably psychologically, and sometimes physically.
Yes, and physically, they have to go to war, right? And who sends them to war? The patriarchy, right? The system, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Whew. Okay, so okay, so I have a few questions here, and I'm going to leave this question about Mary Magdalene and the historical person for a little bit later. And I actually am curious to hear you talk about your spiritual path a little bit more, because you actually dedicate quite a bit of time to it in the book itself, your foray into Hindu philosophies and esoteric Hinduism, including tantra. And I really am wondering how much you feel that may or may not have your own experiences, and that may have affected how you could see this Mary Magdalene in this new light. So
it absolutely affected this. Yeah, thank you for this question. It absolutely affected this. In fact, people may think from what I said right now that I, because I was in Poland and I saw this painting, and then I, started to be interested in Mary Magdalene, but it's not that. It is only in hindsight that I can say that, because then, I just moved away from, Catholicism, and went through my own spiritual path. I went to Asia, and studied with Vedantic teachers. And then I started with tantric teachers, because I realized that, esoteric path is much more, appeals to me much more, and as I said, it holds more truth, although I still love Vedantic teachings. So whatever I say about the other goddess, it's actually heavily influenced by what I have learned in esoteric Hinduism. And just to explain that, and I was initiated to one particular form of esoteric Hinduism and one particular form of tantra, which is the classical tantra of Kashmir Shaivism. And the reason why I'm saying is because, and I hope that it doesn't upset too many people, it is that my general impression is that I have learned very little about spiritual life from Christianity. And nothing made sense to me. And I studied, early church fathers, and, and I felt that still the West actually doesn't grasp very well, the idea of a spirit and the embodiment of a spirit, and then we embody the spirit. When in Hinduism, they have a simple, terms such as like avatar, right? Which means there is a higher being or interdimensional being, if you want to say it in modern terms, that, or somebody, a being that is disembodied, but is of high evolutionary, spiritually, highly evolved spiritually, although it doesn't have to be, because there are also darker spirits, can embody. So it's an avatar, right? So for example, so then it explains, and then there's a concept of a yogi or a dakini. So for example, a yogi, it's not what we do in yoga and class on our mats in the West, but a yogi could be or a siddha, maybe it's a better term, is a human being, and it could be you and me, who devote themselves completely to a spiritual path, and then they reach what is called in Eastern term enlightenment, which is basically oneness with the divine mind. You become like a god or a goddess. So it means that you can have two pathways. So we as humans probably embodied, so originally like almost like avatars at whatever we are, and then now we can actually go back to the state of higher level of consciousness while still in the body, right? But then it requires commitment to your path, right? So it already helped me to understand that, that this is possible. And in Christianity, you wouldn't understand, why, Christ was who he was, and, the great prophets, who they were. And this started to make sense to me. And also then, because I don't know if you want me to elaborate on my tantric experiences and what I have learned in tantra as well.
Yeah. And if you could also just give a brief description of tantra so that those who might not know that there's a difference between neo-tantra and actual like authentic tantra. Yeah.
So when I refer to tantra, I don't refer to neo-tantra, which is a Western tantra, which is actually very different tantra than what I'm speaking about. And I also do not refer to Chinese tantra or Taoist tantra, which is mostly about, from what I understand, preservation actually of the fluids, sexual fluids, for the purpose of longevity, which is a very Chinese and Taoist concept. I'm referring to classical tantra, which basically, it is a very ancient teaching that was originally transmitted by Arda Triambaka, which is, we don't know how early she lived, because we are going back to almost mythological times. Apparently, she was a daughter of one of the three first original sages of Hinduism, whose name was Triambaka, and she's half Triambaka, which means his daughter. And she invented basically, or wanted to share with us, this method of expansion of human consciousness to the divine level, so we can, be like gods and goddesses on earth while being still in this body through sexual practices. So this is what I'm talking about. So I'm not talking about improving your sexual life with your partner. In fact, they're actually discouraging this, to a certain degree, and I can explain why. They are not talking about, for example, restraining sexual fluids because, you want to live longer, which is probably true. They are only interested in this moment of erotic rapture that takes you to the divine mind.
Powerful.
Complete expansion of consciousness, like blowing your mind up, off of your regular way of thinking, so you actually can commune with the divine. Not only you commune with the divine, you realize that you are the divine and you're one with the divine, that it is you, but it's more than you. So you basically become a part of cosmic consciousness in this moment.
Right. And you had a very powerful experience like this.
Like that.
Yeah.
Because I was so committed, I was talking a lot about commitment to a spiritual path. And in fact, I pretty much sacrificed to a degree my academic career for my spiritual path, because I realized that this is more important, right? That, academia has too many limitations. So I flourish in academia, but, this is not my priority. So for about a year and a half, I completely committed myself to the study of chapter 29 of Tantra Loka. So Tantra Loka is a work of classical tantra written in the 10th century by a kind of Indian Einstein, who basically wrote about everything, like a medieval genius from the 10th century, who also invited women to his court, women mathematicians and tantric practitioners. And, so he was a highly controversial figure because he was also a Brahmin and he was breaking all the rules, And so Abhinavagupta. And he wrote his fantastic work, The Light on Tantras. And chapter 29 is exactly committed to what I discuss right now, the description of a ritual, the Kula ritual, which gives you this kind of expansion. Having said so, it is so encoded. That's why I try to, in my book, I try to simplify it, because it's so encoded that even studying it with a Sanskrit scholar for a year and a half, who translated this into English for the first time, we actually both struggled to understand what was in the chapter, because it is heavily encoded, because it was a radical work and they probably wasn't meant for people who are not initiated to understand. And also it is just so far remote from the culture and, and they just assume that certain things are taken for, they will be understood. And I think, what does he mean by that? And you have no idea. And also it's in some parts it's very poetic, in some parts it's very technical, so it's a nightmare in a way. So when I was studying this work, chapter 29, I had a spontaneous experience, of what it says, but I was already actually initiated to the tradition. So I fulfilled, and only in hindsight, I can say that I fulfilled certain criteria. I was initiated to the tradition. I was a completely committed seeker. I put my academic career on the side just to pay the bills, and I focus on studying this. I was at this particular moment, I was just coming back from a study group, the person who translated it, the professor who translated this. And And I was just out of an important relationship, so I was uncharacteristically dating someone very casually, with whom, you know, I was just getting over the real thing, basically. And as this man just happened to wait for me, you know, at my door when I came back from a case study, you know, we engaged in a sexual intercourse, and this is when the experience happened. So I was just fresh from the study group, you know, I studied for a year and a half. I was initiated, and I was not emotionally attached to this man, which is one of the, which triggers people, requirements for this. And why? Because they want you to focus on expansion of consciousness. And if you are in a loving relationship, they say, and I know that it triggers lots of people, there's too much baggage, you know, you want to please each other, you want to this. It is not that, they don't say it's not possible, but you have to be highly evolved not to get involved in the personal stuff. Do you understand? During the ritual.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so it's completely different than neo-tantra, which is, you know, like, how can we reach there together? You can, but if you're not entangled, if you at this moment you're completely committed that it's not about boyfriend and a girlfriend, it's not absolutely about whether we see each other next time. It is, you know, about, you know, reaching this expanded state of consciousness. And at this moment in my life, you know, first of all, I call it complete grace, because I'm not a tantric teacher. I don't even know how to repeat this experience. But at this particular moment in my life, I completely fulfilled all the criteria. Because although I like the man, I was not attached to this man. I didn't care if I see him again. Okay, that was it. And what happened, I started to have a Kundalini movement, you know, as it is explained, at the bottom of your spine. And it is a mind-blowing experience, because I don't know what other people experience as a Kundalini awakening, but you know that this great power, which is you, but it is also not you, is moving through your body. If it is you, it's so much more ancient. It is so much more wiser. It is like you that perhaps before you embodied, or perhaps you at your, you know, when you're one with the universe already, is starting to move through you. And that it shows you, and it is a deeply emotional experience, because it shows you your possibility. That you are not this miserable, you know, human being, really, right? So it's in Hindu, in esoteric tantra, it is called jiva. Jiva is, you know, you think you're this individual being, and you should think that you are Shiva. Shiva, it means your expanded consciousness, not Shiva as God, but you're the divine consciousness. And this divine consciousness started to move through me, and then it stopped, you know, at my heart, and I actually lit up physically, you know, which the man was just like, wow, right? Fortunately, he was a spiritual man, so he knew that, guessed pretty much what's going on, right? Yeah. And this light spilled also on him, and he went into a complete bliss. And then after that, when I was still basically, you know, I had a like, you know, aura around me, which was visible, not just vaguely visible, you know, it's like, you know, camera light was on me. And then it moved to my forehead, and then stopped, and it was an intelligent force, because some people say, how do you know it wasn't an orgasm? Well, it was. First of all, trust me, it wasn't just that. Second of all, it was this intelligence-wise force, and it stopped in my forehead, and it almost was, I could almost sense it thinking, am I just going to give them that, or just I'm going to blow their minds off, right? Yeah. And it actually moved to the right, and it was just like, boom, another, you know, big explosion, which also spilled on the man. And what happens there, that I actually did perceive myself as a form of energy. For a few weeks, I lost a sense of being a material being, which was actually impossible for me to function, because I was just a particle of energy. And wherever I went, I stood at the bus stop, and there was beautiful palms, and, you know, and beautiful parrots. And I just see them like sparkles of energy. I just remember from memory that these are actually palms and parrots, and, you know, so this is what happened. And according, just let me finish, and according to actually to the teachings of chapter 29, this is what happens. And this knowledge was hidden from us, the secret knowledge, that actually we both need a woman and a man, that a woman needs a man to initiate it through. It could be either intercourse or oral sex, you know, so very, very descriptive, you know, when a woman, and then when it doesn't always happen. Just because you do the ritual doesn't mean it's going to happen, you know. And the Kundalini energy awakens. It awakens in a woman and spills on a man. So a man cannot get it without a woman, according to this tradition.
Right. Okay. So many things to unpack there. I just, to satisfy my own curiosity for a second, I just wonder if that visceral experience of that energy running through your body, if it's like when I hear people talk about their near-death experience and they're like, it's just as real for me today as it was. It's just as potent and profound remembering that experience as it was when it actually happened. Do you have that kind of sensation when you talk about it or remember it? Can you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And you know, absolutely. And that's why it is important to talk about it, because it's so easy in a way to forget it, you know, because it reminds you are not only that. And this is what I tell you. And in fact, you know, what Abhinavagupta, this Indian philosopher, is talking about, right? Which is actually, he just wrote down the oral tradition coming from woman to woman, right? The sages, women, but they were not allowed to write it down because they were not allowed to be educated. So he wrote it down. Okay, so it comes from this woman Arda Triambaka, which was centuries earlier. So he says, and once you do this, you will be walking like gods and goddesses on earth, which basically you live in this divine consciousness.
Right.
So, but it's so easy to forget it because, you know, obviously, unfortunately, you come down, you know.
Right. The heaviness of the material world.
Yeah, it's just,
maybe the lucky few can stay there.
Yeah, the lucky few, which are the great teachers, you know, the great and I think, for example, and this is not the only way. So I think that there are some great teachers who stayed there, you know, and I think that maybe Eckhart Tolle is one of them, you know, because you know he seemed to be on continuously. You know, on the same level of consciousness, which is he doesn't go down, basically.
Yeah.
Right? The way I went down, you know, after a few weeks, I just went down.
Right. Yeah, it would seem that way when you watch him talk, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure that we now. Yep, checking the time. Good. So, I just want, like, there's some, I would love for you to talk about Sundari, and like you make this beautiful distinction in your book, which I think was really, really helpful for me, between sex and eros, sexuality and eroticism, and eroticism and like romantic love, and then like love, like this thing that kind of transcends it all, like love, which I think is really, really an important foundation when you talk about these erotic goddesses. And, you know, because in the West, when we think about eroticism, it's really easy to go like down the route of pornography or, you know, kind of that dark route with sexuality. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I would say that, you know, sexuality, the way we perceive it in the West at the moment, or it's unfortunately perceived everywhere, and this is how we are being taught to perceive, is a very kind of animalistic way of using sexuality. And I don't want to insult animals because I love them, but, you know, from a human point of view, basically it is just kind of, you can have great sex and basically nothing happened to you except that you had great sex, right? Like there is no transformation and that's it. So that's just it. And the reason I chose to use the term erotic rapture is, and I also use not only my example, but also people who wrote to me, you know, that they had this kind of experience. It is when you meet someone and you have a sense through sexual contact. You have a sense that you completely know this person. You don't know their details. You don't know they are in a relationship. You don't know where they were born and what is their education, but you have an instant recognition of their soul. So it's knowing each other on this deepest possible level. And it often happens, and I have many testimonies in my book, but one is especially touching. I don't know if we have time to discuss it, when people completely recognize themselves, you know, and each other, and not only each other, but themselves, like they recognize, I am this divine being, you know, and I see this divine being here.
Like in the erotic moment together?
In the erotic, yes. So this is what I call the erotic rapture. And this example that I give in the book that the woman gave me, it is that, you know, they were also in the situation that they could not be together. It was just one of those things that they met and they did the wild thing that they knew they should not be doing because they were both otherwise attached. And it was a not only mind-blowing, but life-changing experience, and also heartbreaking because they had to separate after that. So it's almost like the play of Eros is such that, you know, it asks you for some form of a non-attachment. You understand, which is very difficult for us humans to do this. But it was just because it's such a beautiful experience. So they both had this experience that actually they had out-of-body experience during the lovemaking, which very often happens during erotic rapture. So they were actually under the ceiling as far as they were concerned, right? And they're looking down at their bodies when they're going through this union, which was deeply erotic union. And so Eros is basically sexuality and spirituality at once for me. And you know, and later, you know, they separated, and 20 years later, she decided to take a course, you know, to become a celebrant, you know, marriage, and I think you celebrate also, or celebrant, which is called in Australia, but also funerals, you know, you serve funerals and marriages, secular one. And you know, she just finished the course, and in the small town she moved to, somebody says there was this body of this man that was delivered to his family who doesn't live here anymore, and you know, whether she would be willing to perform a funeral rites for this man, because you know there's no other celebrant at the moment. And she says sure, and she looked at the papers and it was this man.
Unbelievable story.
And she didn't even know that, you know, his family used to live in this town, and you know, she didn't live in this town previously either. And she says, and I felt like he returned, you know, so this is this kind of connection, karmic, I don't know, a connection that you cannot explain, right? So just to contrast it with what is romance, which I think is a in a way beautiful and a strange thing, and it's not sustainable. So again, I'm being radical here. And why? Because this is different from romance, because in this erotic rapture, you just are completely authentic. And it's not that you cannot see each other anymore. It is that you can have it, but you have to be completely honest with each other all the time. You don't do anything to preserve the relationship. You preserve your own authenticity, and you show good, bad, and ugly to this other person. You're completely authentic with each other all the time. You have to work on yourself, and he has to work on, she, with whoever you are in a relationship, has to work on, you know, on themselves, and you're always authentic with each other. You don't play games.
Right.
When in romance we do play games, you know, we just want to preserve a relationship. We want to capture this original moment of glory when we met, and you were so beautiful to him, and you know, he was so handsome to you. And I always give example, you know, you can wear the same red dress for the same man for that many times to the same effect. You know, it is going to wear off. You know, right. And that's why some people are addicted to, you know, moving on, because they want to recapture this original moment. But the only way there is no way of recapturing to start with. The only way of living it and having is what is erotic rapture is, to being completely authentic at all times with another partner. And, you know, most of us play games. Most of us want to preserve relationships. You know, so you can have it, but you have to be completely honest with yourself and your partner at all times. And, you know, brutally honest also with yourself, you know. Right. And accepting of each other, of everything.
And so is that how you get to that state of what you're calling love?
And then it's love, because erotic rapture is this original moment, you know. An erotic rapture can happen later also, you know, through the erotic connection. But this constant work on yourself and full honesty with yourself and with your partner and full acceptance of each other, that's love. Not the ones, I will never leave you, you will never leave me, you know, let's have a family together. That can be a part of this, but it's not about this. Love is in completely accepting yourself and the other, and choosing to go on this glorious and difficult and challenging and amazing journey together, you know. So that's love for me.
This is such an incredible setup to how we're about to talk about Mary Magdalene. And I think you'll have to let me know if you think it's important to bring Sundari into this too, because she seems to be, from the way you describe her, the Hindu goddess that most fully embodies that kind of erotic power that you're talking about, as from the feminine perspective, I guess.
Yes. Yes. So Sundari, I discovered Sundari in an interesting way, but I will skip myself here. I'll just go straight to Sundari. So Sundari is this tantric goddess, which is not very well known. Her full name is Lalita Tripura Sundari. So she's a goddess of the three worlds. And I love a description of her when she's described that her laughter is so sensuous that it brings mango trees into spontaneous fruition, and they start to bear mango fruits, which are beautiful and juicy and sweet. And so imagine what it does to men, right? If mango trees do this. But it's quite interesting because she's a goddess of the free world. So she means she's in the full control of everything, but not in a controlling way, like ego controlling way, but she is actually connected to other dimensions, and she's fully embodied in her feminine power. So she's not using it for manipulation. She just is.
Right.
She just is like that.
And to connect it back to what we were talking about earlier with tantra and the men needing women and women needing men, like the feminine power has something directly to do with embodiment too, physical embodiment. Yeah, correct?
Yeah, I absolutely believe so. So, for example, for a man to achieve it, that's why he also needs a woman, because this energy somehow, and this is what I love about this erotic Kundalini energy. What I actually believe that the universe, the energy of the universe is erotic. I will go that far, because it wants to. Look, why we have a creation? Why do we have planets and galaxies? It is this joyful creation. That's why I think it's a feminine, expression of a divine energy, and that it's an erotic energy. It wants to play. It's actually not that serious. We are serious,
right?
Because we want to control it, and it plays and it creates, and it needs just a little bit of structure, which it gets in a woman's body. And in this classical tantra, woman's body actually, and especially women's genitals or women's sexual parts, embody actually a representation of how the universe works, which means this energy moves, contracts and expands, so they actually worship woman's body and woman's genitals, basically, or woman's womb, as people prefer to say, as the expression of how the creative energy of universe works, because it's a playful, erotic, joyful energy that is just on the exploring, and it is immortal,
And this truth is what's been denied to all of us, not in the religious sphere and the secular sphere, and which is so cool how you experiencing that through your tantra's experience and the philosophies of esoteric Hinduism, and then your encounter with Sundari and embodying her in your own way, and then using all of that as fresh eyes to see Mary Magdalene as a representation of this. In her own way.
Then I had this, okay, well, do we have anybody like that in the West? Because I don't think it's just somehow, it's obviously archetypical energy. So, it's not confined to one religious tradition. So, then I have this moment that I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned it here, when I was in Jerusalem in the church of Saint Mary Magdalene. It was a Russian Orthodox church, or at least Eastern Orthodox church, I think Russian Orthodox church, when I saw this painting of Mary Magdalene in which she's shown in a very empowered way, when she's standing there in a red dress with her hand extended, and she's offering us this, this wisdom. And we probably don't have time to go to in detail to describe this painting, but I realized actually she reminds me of these other goddesses from the West, like Nimna, like Inanna, like Ishtar, like Hathor, like Isis, and they all come with the same symbolism. But many people wrote about it as well, so I'm not the first one. And the same symbolism as Mary Magdalene. Not only that they have the same symbolism, which somehow also symbolizes this, all of the symbols. Basically, what she does symbolize the movement between death and life, or between different dimension, or ascension, or resurrection, you know, depends how you frame the same concept, right? But within different belief systems.
Right.
And that they are somehow vital, you know, for both our birth and death and rebirth and spiritual ascension. So having example of Sundari reminded, and then seeing this painting of Mary Magdalene in Jerusalem, and then doing research and seeing that there are these other goddesses in the West that actually they represent, I don't know, either the same goddess, you know, or maybe a being that resurrects and, you know, reincarnates herself, you know, to teach us all the time, or, you know, any way you want to go, but basically there, or maybe a form of consciousness that is trying to, through the symbols, inform us about its presence, this other goddess, this other feminine, this other energy that is deeply erotic and deeply wise and deeply spiritual at the same time.
Right. And so like seeing Mary Magdalene kind of within the pattern of all of these goddesses that you've just described, and like, first of all, or also reframing eroticism to mean something that's highly spiritual and embodied, that's a path toward enlightenment. And then the secret knowledge within that is that the route to enlightenment, correct me if I'm wrong, is through the embodiment and in the relationality between the masculine and feminine.
Absolutely. And, you know, this is what all religions deny us, except for esoteric religions, including Hinduism, including every single religion in the West or East or something like that. So when I was thinking, why are they vilifying sexuality? Simply because it can be used for the evil doesn't mean that it cannot be used for good. The reason why it is probably used for evil, because lots of conspiracy theorists talk about it all the time, and it is probably true, frankly, it is because it is such a great power. And there are people, it is like this powerful tool, it's like nuclear energy, you know?
Right.
So you can use it for good, or you can use it for something horrible. So if people use it for harm, it was not intended to be used for horrible things. It was intended for us to realize that we are these great beings, you know? So it's actually a wonderful tool.
Right. And so this is who you think this is who you think the actual Mary Magdalene was. But I also wanted to find out from you, kind of within that little matrix there, if you relate to Mary Magdalene as a historical figure, or a mythological archetypal figure, or both at the same time.
I think she was all at the same time. So, you know, obviously we cannot know this kind of truth. Yes. So definitely she embodied a particular archetype. All right. So this is the particular archetype of a goddess or a priestess, you know, which is very similar. Priestess basically embodies a goddess. And for example, the poems of Enjuanada, who was a high priestess of Inanna, show us this, you know, also very deeply erotic poems, right? So you embody the goddess. So this is what really a priestess is. But priestess also has to work on herself. And I always tell women when call themselves, you know, very freely priestesses, you know, you have to do lots of work.
Okay. Yeah, it's not just a title.
Yeah, it's not about dressing up.
It's a way of life.
Although it's a good start. It's a good start because, you know, you embody it in many different ways, right? But it's not enough. So to answer your question about Mary Magdalene, which now I forgot what it is because yes, she was all of this. So I don't know whether she was the goddess or she was just the priestess, you know, embodying it. So but it's not just that, but I do believe she's a historical figure as well. And I think that we have to believe in this kind of things, that she's a historical figure, the way, like, for example, Jesus or Buddha were historical figures. And I really think that scholars who say otherwise are, sorry to say, so I'm being just controversial, deluded, because it actually doesn't help on a spiritual path. If we just have these mythological archetypes and they have nothing to do with us, who cares about those archetypes? I want to know how I can ascend, you know, how I can be the Sundari, how can I be Mary Magdalene, how can I grow spiritually and sexually, and, you know, and everybody else around me. So when you know, for example, that Mary Magdalene and Jesus really existed and they managed to embody this archetype, well, good, because they did it, so we know that we can do it too. They didn't do it to be worshipped. They did it to show us you can be Mary Magdalene, you can be Jesus, you can be Sundari. It depends in which tradition you are. And it's there for you to embody. And that's why esoteric tantra says you will be walking like gods and goddesses on earth. because you embody this, and this consciousness is available for you, and sexuality is one of the ways to embody this. Of course, there are others, if you want, you can torture yourself, and be an ascetic, and you get an experience too, whatever you like, right? I prefer the other erotic path. So I do believe that she was a historical figure. Right. And she embodied the archetype, and therefore she was that archetype.
Right. And that together with Jesus, they practiced essentially what you experienced with your
That's right. Except
lover.
that, obviously they were on a completely different level, right? I got this, I think, experience as that's why I say it's a complete act of grace, or, to show me what is possible. And now you could be that. You're actually that, but at the moment, you live in this limited perception of yourself.
Right. So I also want to bring up something that occurred to me when I was reading your book. And I want to say, too, that go read Joanna's book, because she goes into many of these points in much more detail than we have time for today. It had to do with Margaret Starbird. Here we go. So this is what occurred to me. So you discuss Margaret Starbird's theory. Well, much of her theories, actually. But in particular, you note that for her, the Holy Grail is a symbolic reference to Mary Magdalene's womb, and the literal result of a child born to her in Jesus, which she points to as this supposed royal bloodline. And we have Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which you bring up, and also the Da Vinci Code, I think, is inspired by Margaret Starbird's, right? But what occurred to me was that I think that she was onto something with the Holy Grail being Mary Magdalene's womb, but she's a little caught up in the materiality of children and this royal bloodline, that I think that you made it clear that you don't really care about that so much. And I personally don't either, but that the womb is the Holy Grail, because that's what we're missing, is an understanding of sacred feminine power, sacred female power. And that's the treasure in itself, is the womb and the path to enlightenment through the commingling of divine feminine, sacred female power and sacred male power.
Okay, I love this question. So first of all, thank you for this question. And I think there are 2 points that, I have to really stress. Yes, I agree with you that, she was definitely into something, like she realized feminine is missing and, it's not good. But I think that she did went too material about it. And I think she started the whole thing, right? So infinite respect to start with, right? Infinite respect, but none of us reaches all the truth, and I don't even come close to it either. I'm just showing possibilities. That's why I'm a detective and not a priestess. I'm not pretending anything. So first of all, thank you, Margaret Starbird, because you've started the whole thing. Like if I didn't read it, if we, there would be no also Da Vinci Code, there wouldn't be all kinds of things. So first of all, with all due respect, absolutely, absolutely. Yet at the same time, I think she went astray, because first of all, who cares whether Jesus and Mary Magdalene had children? Okay, I know people are already freaking out. I hope they did, because if they wanted to have children, I want them to have some happiness. Okay, so that's good. If they want to have kids, good, have kids. But if they don't want to have kids, good. I don't care. And there are some people, and I know, and some of them very famous, and they probably will be so upset, but they probably, don't care about me anyway, because they never heard about me. So I can be very, open now. Who cares? And some people believe that you are descendants of his blood. Who cares? Why do you think it makes you special? Did you do anything special for this world? Do you help people to get enlightened? Do you feel divine energy moving through you just because you are of a royal lineage? So it's like somebody in Australia claims they're a child of Charles, from the British royal family out of wedlock, and he wants some money and so. You are the same person, There is no privilege in this, unless there is a special bloodline that helps people to evolve spiritually. So, for example, maybe there is some kind of genetic tweak, then I'm interested in this. But then I don't think that the beautiful energy that I experience is so selective, because it creates actually definition between worthy and worthy and unworthy. Why some people should have some genetic predisposition to, and then others, towards this. I think we are all equal in this way. We all can do what Mary Magdalene and Jesus did. Second of all, I think that apparently, they started some kind of Merovingian dynasty. It was very unremarkable dynasty. So I don't understand why even we should bother with them, except, for early medieval historians. So that, I don't think that Jesus would be interested in starting a dynasty that actually had no spiritual inkling whatsoever, Third thing is that if we identify Holy Grail with the woman's womb in such a literal way, which I think was done, then we are doing the same what patriarchy did to women. At the end, you have to give a birth to a child. Mm-hmm. And I think it is so much more than that. I think that the womb is a place where this divine energy can manifest with exceptional power. But it's not the womb itself. Do you understand? And it's not and one of the beautiful outcomes of this, that a woman can actually create a child, which is amazing. That's amazing and it's beautiful in itself. But I do not believe that this is the final thing, to put it this way. I think that the womb is just a place where these energies meet. This is like a microcosm of what's going on in the universe, when this feminine and masculine energies of great erotic and spiritual power meet. So I think that this is the womb is the place when these energies meet, but it's not, and one of the results of this can be a child, which is a beautiful thing. Right. But when it comes to Jesus and Mary Magdalene, them having a child, that I don't see why it is important, actually. Unless somebody explains it to me in a way that I understand and why it is important, I still don't understand, because I don't care about royal bloods, I don't care for royalties, and so on. By royalties, I mean royal families, right? There are different royal families. And I definitely wouldn't give anybody's, more respect because they come from a special family. I think we are equal. If there's one equality that exists in this world, is a right to spiritual evolution, and a right is the same for all of us.
Right. And that's the secret knowledge. That's the secret knowledge.
And that's the secret knowledge. And there are many ways of going there. One of them is erotic, which I, discuss in my book, the erotic path, but there are many other paths. And all of them say you are that divine being that you worship.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so instead of worship, and this is another thing I learned from Hinduism, can be also a pathway to this, because some people are just devotional. And by having this visio divina, which means, looking at the image of a chosen divinity, let's say Jesus or Mary Magdalene or Sundari or Saraswati or whoever, you identify with this, and therefore you draw on this energy from yourself. Right. So it's one of the paths, and the same the path of Eros is just one of the paths, except that I think it is more powerful in some ways, simply because it is available to us, and because it can be so potent, can be so powerful, right?
Right, definitely. And it's something that we're all inclined to. I mean, I feel like I could say that generally most people are inclined to their kind of erotic impulses or sexual impulses. Yeah.
That's right. They are there, except that we are not using them in a proper way. We are not using them in a conscious way. And, that's okay. It takes time to realize it. It takes research to know that it's possible, right? But it's one of the possibilities that are, open for us to. And this is what, for example, in the Gospel of Philip, which is one of the Gnostic Gospels discovered in 1945 in Nag Hammadi in Egypt, when it says people think that they have to die to be resurrected, when in fact, you have to be resurrected when you are alive. Resurrection is basically, this secret knowledge, knowing that you're already a divine that is embodied on this journey.
Right. This is kind of like why I like to play with this word regeneration, even in kind of the whole, mythos of my journey to the goddess TV, is this idea of recreation, rebirth, all of the time. Yeah,
absolutely.
So let me just look here. I think we're slowly kind of coming to an end here. Although we could talk, I'm sure, for much longer. Before we get on to the kind of what's next portion, God, there were so many other great points though. They're like, I'm seeing here in my notes, like you make this connection between Mary the Jewess.
I really want to talk about it, Kim.
An alchemist. Oh yeah, go ahead. Please, let's talk about them.
So because actually this is a favorite part of my book for me, because I consider it my original research, this part, right? Because the other one is my personal journey and obviously a research, but, I depend on other people. And I made this connection because I was thinking, there's such a popular thing about Mary Magdalene going to France. And it's a quite possibly a legitimate tradition because, there are sources, there are chronicles, and there's a long-standing tradition, and they are usually there for a good reason, right? But even if we believe in this tradition that Mary Magdalene went to France after the crucifixion of Jesus, even according to this tradition, she didn't go there for the next 15 years. So I asked myself the question, where would she go? And not only Margaret Starr, but coming back to her, she said that Mary Magdalene went to Alexandria first. When she was already pregnant, right? So that was the first indication. Then, I thought Alexandria absolutely would be a place where Mary Magdalene would go, because I see her the way she was portrayed in Gnostic Gospels, which we didn't have the time to discuss here. It is, that she was a favorite disciple of Jesus. She was most enlightened of the disciples and his koinonos, which means his intimate partner. So this is what the Gnostic Gospels say. So then I learned through research of other researchers that there was this group in ancient Alexandria, which, by the way, I'm sure your viewers know, it was a culture and spiritual center of the world at that time. So all cultures met there. There's a Library of Alexandria, and it was the place to be, basically.
Right. You described it like modern New York or London or Paris.
New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, all at once. Milan, all at once. It was just anybody who was anybody, and especially educated people, artists, intellectuals, and prophets, they were all there all at once. And it was a very radical place. I love it. So if I could choose a place to be in, I would be first century Alexandria. Yes. So, and so I thought, well, if she was this kind of woman, it makes sense that she would go to Alexandria, but it was just an idea. And through research of other feminist scholars, I discovered that famous philosopher, Philo of Alexandria, a Hellenized Jewish philosopher, like the greatest mind at the time, pretty much, wrote this work, Vita Contemplativa, which is contemplative life. And in one of the chapters of his work, he mentions a group Therapete or Therapetai, who lived in the area of Alexandria and in the surrounding area of Alexandria, who were calling themselves healers, and they were connected with the Gnostics in the Holy Land, as well as with a temple of Isis. And also they invited women to the circle if the women were, of exceptional attainment, philosophically or intellectually, which was not unusual because it was, exclusive group, so to speak, right? Only the smartest could join, but they allowed women. Okay, they allowed women, which is very unusual for the times, but it's right. Alexandria, and that's why it is possible, because they were extremely open-minded. And when I learned that they were in contact with, for example, the Essenes in the Holy Land, and there are good sources that also say that Jesus was associated with Essenes, and if Jesus, then probably Mary Magdalene was associated with Essenes, I said, doesn't it make perfect sense that if I were Mary Magdalene, I would go to a place that I actually can continue with my work, spiritual work, intellectual work, and be safe, a group that would welcome me in a very open-minded environment than staying here when, all disciples disperse, right? Because it was not safe to be there because we're associated with this person that this famous teacher that was just crucified.
Right.
So I thought, what if she went to Alexandria? And then I asked myself the question, was there a woman who vaguely fits the description of Mary Magdalene? And, then I found the work of Zosimus, which is a 3rd century alchemist, a historical figure who mentions a woman, Mary the Jewess, Mary the prophetess, or Mary the alchemist, who was a famous spiritual alchemist who interested in the ascension, so in spiritual aspects of alchemy in Alexandria, and she opened her school there in the 1st century in Alexandria. So I'm not claiming that she's one and the same woman, but I think it's a strong possibility, you know, that Mary Magdalene could be because Mary the prophetess, especially, you know,
Right.
that and Mary the alchemist and Mary the prophetess and Mary the Jewess, one and the same person. And
Right.
to make it even more interesting, Zosimus, the alchemist who mentioned it, lived in Akhmin. It was from Akhmin in Egypt, and this is where the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was also found. That's why I thought there must have been already a tradition of Mary Magdalene as this holy woman in Akhmin, you know, and this is why he actually could tell us the story. So the theory that I'm putting forward is in my book that Mary Magdalene and Mary the Jewess could be the same person. So
It's very compelling.
And I actually really like this because it just sounds true, to put it this way. You know, like it just is aligned with what I have learned about her, you know, especially from Gnostic sources, from esoteric sources.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a very compelling theory, and you presented more information about that to make it more compelling than I had previously kind of imagined. So yeah, because that's exactly what she was in the way that you were describing her as an alchemist, Mary Magdalene, the kind of spiritual alchemist.
Yes. So she was not interested in turning metals into gold, but spiritual alchemy, because if you study alchemy, and I did, has two aspects. One is this, you know, turning gold metals into gold, and the other one is spiritual aspects. So there are many alchemists who basically are what in esoteric Hinduism is called, you know, great siddhis. Siddhas. So they had siddhis, they had powers, they could be in two places at the same time, they could ascend, they could leave this plane altogether. Some alchemists completely disappeared, like they just went in a different dimension, you know.
Right.
So they were experimenting with the human soul, you know, the energy.
Yeah.
And so not with producing gold, right?
Right. It's much more interesting than producing gold.
Absolutely.
Great. So before we get to the what's next part of the closing interview, is there anything else regarding your research or this book that you'd like to bring into the conversation?
I don't know. I think I just like the idea, you know, how you structured the questions, because we went slightly in a different direction than most interviews, which I really appreciate this. So, you know, there are many things in this book, but, you know, I'm happy with what we discussed now. For me, the main, actually, as I said, the most favorite part of my book is actually what I just said, this, you know, and in the second, at the end of the second part of my book, for people who read it, I actually imagine Mary Magdalene arriving in Alexandria. And if I ever, you know, would like to, and maybe this is something that if I have time and money and inclination and energy, would like to explore more in the future.
Oh, I love that. So that segues into the what's next for you, which we discussed a little bit before we were live, but let's talk more.
I actually do not know, because this book was so important to me, although I didn't know it until I actually wrote it, right? Because I wrote it very gradually. And when I finished it, I had a sense that that's it, basically. But also it took a lot out of me, because I also have a full-time job as an academic and so on. So, and I got a serious injury, you know, from spending too much time on computer. So I lost use of my hands for 9 weeks. And so that was a very scary experience. And I have some opportunities coming my way. For example, somebody wanted me to create with them a deck of cards, you know, with different goddesses, another one, and then do some other research, academic research. And I'm simply not sure, because now I feel like I've done my work and I just want to rest. But at the same time, I have many books in my head, and I'm open to many possibilities. But at the moment, I'm so exhausted, and the way that things are working out in my life, it will have to be a great offer for me to do this.
Right.
You understand? Because I decided that I gave so much out of myself. I consciously made myself a vessel for for this project and for other projects. So very much neglected myself. And at the end of this project, with this injury that now is getting better, obviously, right? Like I have my use of hands, but I have to be very careful. Is that I have to now learn to embody the goddess and not only to serve the goddess, right? So walk your talk, basically, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to take care of myself now. And if some wonderful project comes that, my way, but it also helps me to take care of myself, so I don't have to, again, completely sacrifice myself.
Exactly. Like the self-sacrificing mother.
I'm done with it.
Yeah.
So and if not, maybe that's it. Carry water, chop wood, as they Zen say. Yes. And maybe this is Zen master say, and maybe that's it for me. I don't know. I'm just in complete openness.
I had that exact same conversation over and over again after I finished my doctoral thesis last October. Everything you just said was basically what I was saying to people.
Because it's so exhausting, PhD is exhausting as well, right? So,
So I had one more question that occurred to me while you were talking now, and that is, what do you know now about yourself after all of this research about Mary Magdalene that you learned from her, from the research itself or from your personal relationship with her?
So I'm not sure what the question is. Once, I'm sorry.
What have you learned?
What have I learned about myself?
Yeah, through the process of researching Mary Magdalene and or through your kind of personal relationship with her during this process.
Do you intend it as an advice for other people or just a personal reflection?
Well, I was thinking personal reflection, but it could come out as advice if that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for me, for a personal reflection is that you have to trust yourself. You have to really block away all other voices, because most of the time the voices are not very good. People just repeat what was told before, and I am a strong believer in a spiritual evolution. We evolve as species spiritually and intellectually and emotionally. And I think you just have to tune into your own intuitive voice and trust it unconditionally. And do not listen to the voices of the world, because I believe that they are often very wrong. Occasionally you meet a person that will say the right thing at the right moment and then listen. But otherwise, pretend that you're listening just out of politeness, because don't take it, as an advice. Trust yourself. I think this is what I have learned. And for myself also, I need to find more balance in my life. That's why I said now I have to learn to embody this, because, I didn't, I made myself a vessel. And so balance and trusting yourself and being really careful what you're listening to in a deeper level. Obviously, you listen to what people say because you want to be engaged with people, but on a deeper level, and seeking out the truth in a very kind of unconditional way that is your own way, and then thinking like, how can I share it with other people that it makes sense to them as well, right? So sometimes you have to shake up some people, things are urgent, right? And that's okay. But it shouldn't be about controversy, or it is just like, we have to remember, for example, in my case, we have to wake up to this other archetype, this other goddess that we all have to embody, we have to honor it. It just wants to be spoken about, it wants to be acknowledged. And we really need it. We really need this other
and
form
embodied,
of consciousness. Right? Embody it. And we really need to embody this other form of consciousness, because we are destroying everything around ourselves, and there are so many unhappy people in the world, even in the developed countries, especially in the developed countries. So clearly we are not making right choices. And we need this other consciousness, this other goddess. And she wants to speak to us. So, and so we need to embody her. So this is what I say. And this is like a path that is different for everybody else. We all can embody her in a different way. And it's the beauty of it, right? Yeah. So find the way in which you can embody her, right? And ask yourself, how can I embody her?
Yeah. Right? Yep. She is the light. She is the way.
She's the light. She's the way. Yeah. And in your own way, right? Also, like she's there. So she's like this energy that waits to be embodied, and you give it very special embodiment with your own special flavor.
That's right. Yes. I love that. Thank you, Dr. Joanna. Do you can you please tell the audience where they can learn more about your work?
Okay. So I don't want to sound too self-promotional, but I really buried my body and soul and mind in We Are the Goddess. So it's impossible to know me better than, through We Are the Goddess, through the book. And also I am very active on Facebook. I have a public page, Dr. Joanna Kujawa, and I try to post, 3-4 times a week related, to this kind of thing. So it's not just personal. And I reposted also on Instagram, so if you're on Instagram or on Facebook, you want to stay in touch. I have a small YouTube channel where I try to post 2 videos per month as well, related to what we have just been talking about. And I have a website, which is basically joannakuyaba.com. So these are the ways you can get in touch with me.
Okay, perfect. I will put some links to those sites in the YouTube text box for people as well, to make that easy.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for being here. And thank you everybody for watching this fantastic conversation. Like I said at the beginning, please share this video, please leave a comment, and please subscribe to the channel, and go buy Dr. Joanna's book on Amazon. You can also get it Kindle. You can get it both ways. So there's no excuse not to buy it. So yeah, thank you everybody. And Dr. Joanna, I'm going to see you in just a minute. So don't go anywhere.
Absolutely.
Okay. And to everyone at home, thank you. Until next time. Ciao.
Thank you so much.
Yes.